Hey y'all, my name is Priscilla and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk a little bit about some of the nonfiction books that I've been reading recently. With it being Nonfiction November and with lots of people really excited about nonfiction, I thought I'd put a little bit out there and maybe encourage you to pick up some of the books that I've liked recently. So let's get on to that. So the first book that I want to talk about is called Kid Gloves by Lucy Nicely. I think it's Nicely. I always mispronounce her last name. But this is a graphic novel memoir, and Lucy Nicely is New York Times best-selling author of most of her graphic novel memoirs, and I love all of them. I'm a huge fan. So in this particular graphic novel, Lucy walks us through another very transitional, pivotal moment and time in her life. At this point in her life, she's actually giving birth to her first child, her son, who she affectionately calls Pal. And it walks us through from trying to get pregnant, through some of the health issues that she had, a number of miscarriages. There was a lot of vomit. She had a lot of sickness related to her pregnancy and had to have a C-section and having a child for the first time. So I really commend this graphic novel. I really love how vulnerable Nicely is with all of us. She's very transparent, very open about all of the depression and isolation that she felt trying to get pregnant and then getting pregnant, and seeing how some of her friendships weren't gonna be the same anymore because she had a lot of single friends and moving into motherhood. And I feel like that's really important when you're discussing pregnancy and also when you're discussing miscarriage. I really like how she's just really open with all that, and she deep dives into some of those themes with some scientific historical background information, some cultural data. And 1 in 4 women, for instance, will experience a miscarriage, but you don't nearly hear 1 in 4 women discussing miscarriage. So there's a bit of skew of information and at least perception of what people think about when they think of pregnancy. I think that Nicely has a really great balance of humor and education and personal commentary. I think I am even more freaked out personally about pregnancy at this point than I was before, but I'd highly recommend this if you're at all interested in graphic novels and memoirs and pregnancy and motherhood. There's also a really great note about how doctors oftentimes ignore the symptoms that women are having, and that is one thing that is kind of driven home towards the end, especially with the condition that she had while she was giving birth and could have taken her life. But still a really great memoir that kind of makes me more freaked out about birth and motherhood, but a really great read. So next up, I read I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. This is a very short nonfiction book. I think it was like 100-ish pages. I also listened to it on audiobook, and it was about 4 hours long. So super short, but hard-hitting and very impactful. I mentioned this, I think, in my mid-year book freakout tag, and it's still one of those 5-star reads that sticks with me even months and months after having read it. So Vivek Shraya is a trans Canadian Indian artist. She has written poetry as well as is moving into a nonfiction realm, and I think has a fiction book that is coming out pretty soon. And I just adore how she tackles these heavy themes of racism, of transphobia, of homophobia, and is very vulnerable with the audience. But I think it's one of those books that is very required reading for people that don't know any of this, that are kind of new to the idea of trans women being violently murdered and targeted. So this book really talks about a lot of the toxic masculinity that results in the murder of trans women and of the gay community, and how the gay community is still not as accepting of trans women as you would think it would be. So because of the book's length and its themes of feminism, I was reminded of another book that I read called We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. However, whereas Adichie, I think, was very very introductory to feminism. I feel like Shreya's work is much more of a deep dive, much more inclusive, especially with its themes, of course, of LGBT and trans women specifically, and trans women of color specifically. Shreya says, "I am afraid of men because it was men who taught me fear. I'm afraid of men because it was men who taught me to fear the word girl by turning it into a weapon they used to hurt me. I'm afraid of men because it was men who taught me to hate and eventually destroy my femininity. I'm afraid of men because it was men who taught me to fear the extraordinary parts of myself." So yeah, it's just an incredibly succinct and illuminating piece of nonfiction that I highly recommend that you read. The next book I want to talk about is called Kurama, My History of Embracing Purpose, Healing, and Hope by Kurama Brown. So you may recognize Kurama Brown's face because he is one of the Fab Five in the Queer Eye show on Netflix. And that is what brought me to his memoir, because I felt like I didn't really know Kurama the first season of that show. I am a fan of Queer Eye. And reading his memoir, I just really understand a lot more about his life and what he's trying to do, what he's trying to build. And I love this title, this subtitle, because you kind of know what this book is about based on that very lengthy title. So Kurama has lived a very full life, and I really loved the conversational tone of his memoir. I also listened to the audiobook for this one because I just prefer memoirs that are read by the author, that are narrated by the person that wrote their life story. This story isn't chronological, so he will begin a specific chapter based on a certain theme, and we'll kind of go back and forth in his life with things that are relevant to that theme. So at first I thought that storytelling non-chronological order was a little bit harder to read. It took a little bit more brain power to connect the dots, but I think it's worth reading that to understand the full picture of his life. So yeah, from the very first chapter, I knew that I was going to really enjoy this book because Kurama discusses how his Jamaican father really wanted to name him and the power that is in giving names to people, to things. And he named him Kurama, which in Swahili means intelligent. So of course that is something that Kurama had to carry with him throughout school, college, and as an adult, which is something he had to grow to love to learn, and now which he has a deep respect for. So Kurama also has a background in social work, which is not surprising if you've watched Queer Eye and you kind of understand his role in that show. He has a very hands-on approach to the heroes that they have on that show. He wants to get at the heart of the issue and really work on healing, because that is his life journey, and he really wants to share a little bit of that with everyone. So obviously I'd recommend this book, but it may be more valued and appreciated by people that are actually fans of the show that want to know more about Kurama's life. I think that some people may find his writing style, his narration, a bit preachy, but coming from a church background, a religious background, I think that I kind of understand that, and I kind of understand why he would write a book like that. And if you see how the way he talks to the show, you kind of expect that anyway. But still a really good memoir about a gay Black man really making moves in the entertainment industry and how he got there, his ups and downs. And he was an alcoholic. He had a very addictive personality, and how he became a father. That's a really interesting story to hear about. So yeah, just really highly recommend this book. Okay, so my camera just died. Apologize if there's a jarring shift, but what can you do? So the next book that I want to talk about is The Collected Schizophrenias, and this is written by Asmy Wang. This was a book that really, oh my goodness, it was so good. It's a collection of essays about a Asian American woman that is living with schizoaffective disorder and with a bipolar type and also Lyme disease. So it's a really unique look into the mind of someone that is plagued with such a heavily stigmatized mental disorder. So these essays really cover a wide range of topics. There's an essay about being diagnosed with this disorder and what that means and discovering what that means. There's a really touching essay about the decision not or to have children, because a lot of these mental illnesses are genetic and can easily be passed on from mother to child. There's a topic about the perception of what is deemed high functioning individuals with mental illness and how that plays into the value that certain folks are given over those that are considered not as high functioning. And there's discussions about being committed involuntarily. What is that like from a person that has been committed involuntarily? There's a discussion about her psychosis episodes. So just really, really great information and really well written. I really enjoyed these essays. So I think that Wang's writing really approaches these topics of mental illness with nuance and with complexity that is really able to encompass an entire array of sentiment about her diagnosis. So I really didn't know much about schizophrenia outside of the cultural understanding of schizophrenia, which is very incorrect. I think that schizophrenia is one of those mental illnesses that a lot of people kind of throw around, but don't really understand, because I don't think that the experts themselves really understand it. It's a bit of a mixed bag of symptoms. There isn't like a direct test or a direct even array of symptoms that can 100% diagnose somebody like, oh yes, that's schizophrenic disorder. And it has been changed and reassessed many times over the past few decades. So it's something, a mental illness of the brain that really scientists even themselves don't know a lot about. So a lot of this book really feels like a memoir, but there are also some parts that I enjoyed that were more investigative in culture and in science, that just really gave a lot of information that made this a very well-rounded selection of essays. Outside of a couple of the essays that I feel were a bit out of place, that I didn't connect to as much, I felt like this was a really strong collection. And since it was published in 2019, I hope that it will go very far in the BookTube prize for the nonfiction selection. Some of these essays were also particularly emotional regarding Wang's personal life with her family, and those really touched me. And I just think it's a really strong collection that if you're interested at all about mental illness, especially from women and even more rarely from women of color, you should definitely give this one a try. So next up, I want to talk about Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. No surprise here, I absolutely loved this book. It's a new favorite, and I honestly recommend everyone read it. Jacqueline Woodson is a Black author that writes mostly middle grade and kids lit. She's a poet and very lyrical in her particular memoir here, which is about her childhood growing up in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. And this is a story that is written in verse, so it's very beautiful, and I loved it. I loved listening to Woodson's narration of this because it just brought a lot of that home. I would say the hardcover book is also worth picking up because in it she includes pictures from her family and family trees, so you kind of get to orient yourself with everyone that she mentions and is talking about in this book. So this is a middle grade story about Jacqueline Woodson's life, and I'm just really baffled by people that don't enjoy memoirs because they feel like they can't connect to a certain story or relate to a certain story, because I don't feel that you have to relate to memoirs to enjoy them and to recognize how good they are. For me, it's not about rating someone's life or decisions made in life. I think it's more about the experience of reading about that life, which I think is a pretty clear distinction. But anyways, that's a rant that I have for reviews that we're not talking about right now. So in this case, of course, Woodson's craft is just remarkable. It's extraordinary. It says a lot for the genre for writing in verse, and I just think it's really well done, and I think it's a really great addition to anybody's shelf. This book creates very vivid portrayals of what it's like growing up in the South during the Civil Rights Movement, learning about the Freedom Riders and Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and Malcolm X, and living with a family and then moving to Brooklyn to the North, and what that whole change is like, and also Woodson's how she falls in love with writing. So if you're looking for just a very elegant, well-written story about a Black girl living in the South, growing up in the South and coming of age and falling in love with literature and writing, I'd highly recommend you read this. Next up, I want to talk about Money Diaries by Lindsay Stanberry. This is a nonfiction business book about all things finance and business and navigating adulthood for specifically millennials, and learning about all kinds of things that you probably wouldn't learn about unless you seek out information for yourself. So what it's like buying a house and applying for a 401k and asking for a pay raise at your job and budgeting and all these things that I think are really important to learn about as a young adult, a young professional. This is a story that is based on the very well received, I think it's a Refinery 29 series on YouTube. You can look up those videos yourself where they will deep dive into someone's finances for the past month. They'll talk about their salary and go line by line what they're spending their money on and what their budgeting is and their outlook on money. So all that is just fascinating to me. One thing that I took away from this book is setting up an emergency fund and really looking more into savings, because I'm really bad about savings, and setting up like a separate savings account and having like a rainy day fund if I decide that I hate my job and I want to change my life. For instance, but there's lots of reasons to have that. Also, I would like to live my life outside of student debt one day. So budgeting is actually something that's kind of very important to me and on my mind lately. So that's why I particularly took a lot from this book. But I will say that the book itself is more of a workbook. It's written in diary format with some of these women talking about how they're spending their money day to day, like literally by time and day. 1 o'clock, I go buy lunch kind of thing. And 2:30, I'm sitting at my desk and what I'm thinking about kind of thing. And then it will deep dive into a specific topic and give pointers from a financial advisor of what you should or shouldn't do in a specific situation. I particularly like the diary sections, but I don't think that everyone would like them because it's not all about money. But in my mind, I feel like it just evenly dispersed these topics in a way that wasn't boring. That wasn't like buying a textbook about finance at a university store. It made it more entertaining for me. And if that is something you might struggle with, I would recommend the audiobook because it reads more like a memoir-esque diary section, and then it'll dive deep into a finance topic. So I think this book is just really easy to follow for people that are new to finance, that don't know anything about budgeting, about student debts, about what it means to have healthcare in the United States particularly, and what kind of budgeting you should be doing towards having the lifestyle that you want. So some of the topics I think could be easily skipped if they're not pertaining to you or you're not interested in. But I really liked the part about student debt because it was just really nice to hear some feedback from other professionals like myself that feel that heavy burden of having to pay off their student debt and feeling like it's never going to happen, but how they're handling it and what they're doing and what motivates them to pay it off or just to live with it and make the best of their financial situation. I feel like those topics, along with the rainy day fund discussion, were motivating and felt within reach for the first time since ever thinking and knowing of those things. I will say there were some chapters and there was some bit of advice that annoyed me. For instance, Strandberry mentions that you could save money by doing little things if you want to, by not having Starbucks every day and using your company coffee maker instead. Come on. I mean, not every millennial is buying Starbucks every day, and not every millennial has the privilege of going into a work office that has free coffee every day. So things like that can be really annoying, that grated my nerves, but you can just overlook those issues and get to some of the other topics and discussions and really get something from this if you wanted to. It's just a blind spot and not recognizing the privilege that some people have and that some people may not have access to. And I know that some people appreciate more of an aggressive approach to paying off student debt and others don't. Others want to live. And I think that the message in this book is just making your situation work for you, setting goals, and understanding the different options that you have to meet those goals. So this book is really basic in its format. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. It is very specific in who it's targeting. So obviously I would recommend it to those kinds of people that are new to finance and don't really know anything about budgeting and paying off their student loan debt. So next I want to talk about The Reckonings by Lacy K. Johnson. This is a nonfiction collection of essays from a local Houston author. She teaches creative nonfiction at Rice University. So as you can imagine, she can write. It's really well written, and this is probably the closest that I've come to reading an essay collection and rating it 5 stars. So Lacy Johnson wrote a memoir called The Other Side, which details a very horrific event that happened to her. So her ex-boyfriend kidnapped her, held her hostage, raped her, and attempted to murder her. And this book is sort of the aftermath to some of the questions that she got when she was on tour for that memoir. A lot of these essays, I think, tackle the topic of justice. What does justice look to you, to Johnson, after having been put through hell by someone that she trusted, and what she thinks should happen to her ex? Does she want him to serve in prison for the rest of his life? Do you think that he deserves to be tortured or serve the death penalty? Those were the kinds of things that she had to grapple with. And she uses this idea of justice in her personal life and kind of applies it to an array of topics in a number of different essays. So I was immediately intrigued by this premise alone. The first essay, titled The Reckonings, was probably the strongest of all these, and it's such a well-written piece of creative nonfiction. Johnson has a very analytical kind of approach to writing about justice, and looks into like the cultural, artistic, a number of different approaches to what justice could look like, and historically how it's looked like, scientifically what it could look like, environmentally. It's just a really, really wide breadth look at what justice is. So just to be clear, Johnson doesn't want her boyfriend, her ex, to be killed. She actually wants him to be held accountable, and that is what justice really looks like to her. So I think that moral code as applied to a number of topics like the BP oil spill, like hurricane victims, like having a disgruntled white colleague not like that other students call his work racist. That lens of looking through and looking at injustice issues and justice issues was just fascinating. It's such a well-written book. I highly recommend that you read it. So next up, I want to talk about Algorithms of Oppression: How Search Engines Reinforce Racism by Safiya Noble. So Noble happened to Google the term Black girls in the Google search engine, I believe in 2004. And she was just really taken aback by the automated searches and the results on the first page of Google. And this prompted her to understand a bit more about Google's algorithm and why it's racist, because it's undeniable it is racist. And the search results on the first page back then came out with a lot of pornographic sites. And she was looking up things to do with her own young Black girls during the summer and was just taken aback by the results that she found. So the claim of this book is that algorithms in itself are racist, and the results that come of that are racist. And that is the model that is at the heart of most computer systems. So I think Noble makes a great point that the algorithms that are used for Google, for instance, are the results of bad decisions made by designers, by the people behind them. And there is the possibility for them to be made better, which Google has done over the years when they have been called out, but is done at their discretion. Google in itself is first and foremost a business, and I think that people forget that, because the search results that come from Google are often taken as fact, and that's not true. They're taken based on a number of algorithms that are unknown to Noble and to anyone that doesn't work for Google, that are paid. There are AdSense, there's a search engine optimization that is taken, and they are first and foremost a business. So I think the perception by the general public is that you can take what Google spits out at you as fact, as true, as peer-reviewed, and it's not. In this book, Noble strives to understand algorithms, Google's algorithms, with a race theory lens. So this book is very hard to critique. It's very academic. I will say it's kind of a harder book to read because it's very data driven. There's a lot of examples and a lot of different takes on why it could be, but there isn't like a definite understanding about everything. And I think that this book is great for her field, for the industry, a great resource, but not necessarily good for an average reader to pick up, or easy to read for an average reader to pick up, I should say. So there were parts in this book, though, I was really glad that I did read. There was a part, for instance, about Dylan Roof. If you don't know, Dylan Roof was a white supremacist, is a white supremacist who is currently, I believe, serving a sentence for his crime. He one day decided to go into St. Emmanuel Church, which is a historical Black church, and kill a bunch of Black people. And allegedly, in his manifesto, he states that he Googled Black on white crime. And the search results that he got were very white-ringed, very discredited searches, results that shouldn't have been taken as fact, but that in many cases, most people may take as fact. So the questions that Noble is asking is, why is it that these are the resources that are solicited first? Why wouldn't, for instance, the FBI site come up, or maybe local police reports come up that would say that Black on white crime isn't a thing, that isn't a high number of crime experienced by white folks? Those are the things that she's asking, and those are the things that back up her theory that these algorithms are racist and that reinforce racism. The main point of this book is that Google promotes misogynistic ideals, racist ideals, especially on Black women and women of color. While Google is perceived as a neutral, authoritative site, it shouldn't be. It's a business first and foremost. And that's something that I wish more people understood. Like when the Obamas were in office, if you searched for Michelle Obama, the results would recommend Michelle Obama ape. Or like if you research professional women, a lot of white women come up versus nowadays maybe it may be a little bit more multiracial, but the heart of these algorithms are based in racism. And I thought a lot about how this could possibly affect YouTube. I think there's a lot of discussion about diversity on YouTube and why white creators are always more successful in subscriber count and visibility in the algorithm. And I think that this might be why. I don't know. Maybe that's just me reaching, but I mean, Google owned YouTube, has owned YouTube, does own YouTube at a time. There's no way that they evaded that sort of background foundational algorithm. So that's something I thought about reading, and that's why I really appreciated this book. Okay, so the last book that I want to talk about, I read for Latinx Heritage Month, called My Beloved World by Sonia Sotomayor. So Sonia Sotomayor is a Puerto Rican woman from the Bronx who is currently sitting on the Supreme Court U.S. Supreme Court Justice bench. So the memoir follows her from childhood, being diagnosed with diabetes type 1, which is a very rare form of diabetes where you have to inject yourself with insulin every day, which she learned to do at a very young age, and which really, I think, grounded her and made her realize at a very young age that she could only rely on herself. Between that and her father's untimely death, and his alcoholism, and traveling to and from Puerto Rico, and growing up in impoverished situations in the Bronx, she really was driven, had to drive herself and motivate herself to do well in life. And that's what she did. And this follows her going into Princeton and then Yale, and climbing the ranks as an attorney at a private law firm, and then of course being appointed as judge. So it does end at the point where she becomes judge. She doesn't talk about anything after that. So if you're looking for that, you're not going to find that here. You're not going to find anything about her experience as a Supreme Court justice. So I think that Sotomayor's story will resonate with a lot of people because of her candor, but also her moral compass and her ability to overcome hardships like poverty and chronic illness and being raised by a single mother. One thing that rang true for me while reading this book was, over and over again, Sotomayor mentions that successful people are not self-made. No one is ever self-made. And if you realize that at an early age, you can start seeking out help. And there's a number of times that she reached out for a mentor, for someone to help her, to learn from. And it was in those moments that she really saw a lot of growth in herself. She learned that at a very young age. I think it was in middle school when she asked another girl how to study. How does she study and how does she do so well on tests? And this girl told her. And there's a number of times that people don't even realize that they have an opportunity to mentor someone else, and you have to be that person to ask for help. And she did that over and over again, and that's how she got to where she is. So Sotomayor is brilliant. She's so ambitious. She's such a beacon of light for the Latinx community. I love that she has that connection to the Latinx community and giving back. She's still writing books. She wrote some children's books that I talked about in another video, a Latinx Lit video. So I just love that she is the first Latinx Supreme Court Justice that we can all aspire and look to as inspiration. She's also really fantastic at capturing the raw energy of the Bronx, of Puerto Rico, and of her life, especially in the earlier years. I loved hearing about her family and the dynamics within her family and the parties that they had, and how anytime you leave a social gathering, there's that whole goodbye tour where you have to tell everyone goodbye individually, and you know you're never going to leave because your mom won't stop talking. There's little things like that that I thought were really great to include. Some of the scarier things about brujeria in her family, and just the connection to her cousins, and how she got married, and the struggles with her marriage, and the struggles with going to a Ivy League school as a Latina, and the ridiculous things that she heard from other people of how she must have only gotten in because of affirmative action, which is not true. She got in because she deserved to be there, which is something that I think Latinx people kind of have to deal with the entirety of moving forward in life, right? Because we feel like, at least from experience, I can say that the idea of deserving to be in a place and take up space in a place where you don't belong is always there as a Latinx person in white spaces, in spaces that are made for white people. So that's something that I really liked hearing from someone that has been through it and that has navigated it and has made it. I will also say that the audiobook is narrated by Rita Moreno. I actually listened to a lot of audiobooks in this wrap up, but that audiobook is amazing because I love Rita Moreno. She's just an icon in film and as a Latinx person in film. So if you want to listen to the audiobook, that's also a great option. Okay, so that is all the books that I have recently read that I want to talk to you about that are nonfiction. So if you have read any of these books, or if you want to read them now, you should come talk to me in the comments down below because I would love to hear from you. Oh, actually, I also wanted to mention that the BookTube prize for nonfiction is happening next year in 2020, and there is a Google Doc form if you would like to be a nonfiction judge and contribute. I will say that I have decided to be a judge for next year, and I'm really excited about it. So I'll make sure to leave that down below. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!